Well, hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be here today. I am a little bit of the odd one because I'm an artist, not necessarily a tech entrepreneur, although I do have a company that sort of supports my artwork. But my artwork is at the intersection of art, science, and technology. So I have a background, somewhat similar to one of the earlier speakers today. I did an undergraduate in neuroscience and then moved into design and humanities, information science, new media theory, and I sort of combine it all with my work. And to sort of give you a context of how this all functions and how it all has developed and what actually I'm doing, I want to go way back. So I grew up in a very small town in Iowa, in the middle of the United States. The town is called Badger, and it had 600 people in it. And basically, just completely surrounded by cornfields and soybean fields. This town was also very much settled by people with Swedish and Norwegian descent. So at the Lutheran church, there would always be lutefisk at the right time of the year. But, I had experiences there that are perhaps, something that many of you could relate to. So I didn't really feel like I fit in. And some of this probably was due to sort of my weird interests, but some of it was also probably due to the fact that I had an understanding that I was queer, that I was transgender, but really didn't have the possibility to talk about it or experience it given the rural location and the time period. So at night, I would go into the backyard of my house and basically take a flashlight and point it up to the stars and turn it on and off in order to try and signal to the aliens to come and take me away because I felt like outer space would be perhaps a better place for me. So that led many, many years later to the development of what I'm calling xenology. And this is a term that I didn't actually come up with, but was actually sort of developed for, yes, the study of different types of alien biologies, both within a science fiction context, but also within actually existing research about extraterrestrials. Some of you may have heard about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so xenology is sort of imagining what would alien biology be like, what would alien technology be like in order so we can figure out how to actually find these extraterrestrials. But I really wanted to push this much further. So thinking about not only alien bodies, but also any other bodies that are seen as different. So queer bodies, trans bodies, differently abled bodies, people of color, everyone who doesn't fit into the mainstream of things, right? And so I really wanted to sort of explore how we can push this focus on the alien or the different as a way of exploring how we can become even more interesting aspects of ourselves. And so a lot of this actually has to do with outer space. And so this is a poster that I created last year. And so some of the numbers are a bit off here because there's been more people who have been to space since I made this poster. But it sort of gives you the numbers, in a certain sense, of how rarefied, how rare it is for people who are not white males to go to space. So 11.5% of space travelers have been women. And as far as we know, only 0.35% of space travelers have been LGBTQ+, and 0% have been transgender. And I put an asterisk on both of those because it's entirely possible that some of these astronauts actually are queer or LGBTQ or transgender, but just can't be out because of their circumstances. And so a couple of years ago, in 2020, I was given the opportunity to send a project to the International Space Station. And this project is called TX-1. And TX-1 launched on March 7th, 2020. There were some things going on in the world at that time. And so, as any good space mission requires, we designed a mission patch for this, designed by the Serbian graphic designer Irma Puškarević. And so what was in TX-1? Well, it includes fragments of my hormone replacement medications. So these spheres are very, very small, only about 4 to 5 millimeters in diameter. And so, because sending things to space, very hard, you don't have a huge volume to work with. So from left to right here, I have a fragment of what's called a spironolactone pill, which is prescribed to transgender women in the United States to suppress testosterone. In the middle is a fragment of a Vivel dot patch, which is prescribed to give me estrogen. And on the right is a handmade Abaca paper sculpture to gesture towards all the other xenoentities that I couldn't put into this project. And as one of my good friends tells me, you never go to space alone, and it was very much true with this project. So TX1 was one of 9 artist projects that was able to go in a project called Sojourner 2020. And this was supported by the MIT Space Exploration Initiative. And what's really important about this is that not only was I able to send something up, but they were also trying to really make this quite diverse. So there was indigenous artists from North America, artists from Peru and Argentina and Thailand, all people who don't normally have access to send things to space. We were able to get one downlink of a video of this structure that the projects were in. And so basically, there's 3 levels to the structure. The top level did not rotate in order to simulate microgravity or weightlessness. The middle layer rotated to simulate Mars gravity, and the bottom layer rotated to simulate moon gravity. And that was the layer that TX1 was on in order to gesture towards the feminine understandings of the moon or Luna. Now, what's really important about this project is that it actually came back to Earth on April 7th, 2020. So many things that go to space end up burning up in the atmosphere in terms of being disposed of. But in this case, the actual project came back. And so I'm actually able to hold it in my hands, although it's in an exhibition right now, so I don't have it with me. But basically, this signals to me a form of resilience that, aspects of this part of my body and part of my existence don't necessarily just burn up in the atmosphere, but actually are able to come back to Earth and thrive once again. And I think that's really important because as far as we know, this is the first known time that aspects of the transgender experience have orbited the Earth. Thanks. So this is a project that I have exhibited in a few places, and I basically exhibit it with a box that actually also flew on a space shuttle mission in the 1990s. But I also have produced some video work that sort of contextualizes the project, that really sort of looks at these ideas of living in rural areas, of our imaginations of space, especially within sci-fi, because I was very influenced by science fiction, film and television, and writing. And certainly within sci-fi up until the most recent years, there's not been a lot of representations of queerness or transness in those programs or films and so forth. And so I'm going to show you a short clip of this piece, but I'm happy to share it with you later if you want to see the full piece that really goes into some of these questions about existing when you sort of feel quite alienated.
There's no payload on it yet, and there won't be until right before launch.
Dear interlocutor, I've been unable to tell you much about my hometown, which is unfair because that place is so fundamental to why I'm continuously searching for you. It's hard to convey to you how small my village was. I tend to describe it this way. Badger is a town of 600 people in the middle of nowhere in Iowa. Of course, that's not entirely true. In fact, there were miles upon miles upon miles of cornfields and soybean fields and hog and chicken confinements. When the wind was just right, the stench of manure from the eggplant 4 miles to the west would drift into town. In short, it is an industrial wasteland of contemporary agriculture. When I lived there, my house was at the eastern edge of the town, our backyard abutting the endless fields. Corn one year, soybeans the next. Our organic garden next to the herbicide-drenched fields. I wasn't allowed to leave the boundaries of the town. The county road that passed right next to my house was too dangerous, as the semi-trailers carrying the grain barreled down the highway at 55 miles per hour. The road itself was paralleled by deep ditches that held the snow during the gray, frigid winters. So, I was effectively confined to Badger. I'd ride my bike around and around the circumference of the town so many times that the nosy housewives would peer at me from behind their drawn curtains, eyeing me with an air of suspicion. You don't know surveillance until you've lived in a small community.
Some of you probably quite understand that. Thanks. So this video piece is framed as a series of letters, actually, that I'm writing to an interlocutor. And I imagine that interlocutor as being an extraterrestrial. So as I was developing this project TX1, I was also thinking about, well, maybe I actually want to go to space myself. And so what would I need on a long-duration space mission? Well, I would need a way to produce my own hormones for the duration of that space mission. And so I was basically thinking through, okay, how might we be able to do this in a way that wouldn't require me to bring my own pharmaceuticals with me? And so I happened upon, through some research, the idea that I could possibly genetically engineer my testicular cells to produce estrogen rather than testosterone. And sort of, in terms of the biochemistry, it's not too hard. You basically turn on a gene called aromatase that basically converts the testosterone to estrogen. However, of course, everything having to do with biotechnology is actually wicked hard. So this was something that we were wanting to do with some CRISPR technologies, including CRISPR-A, CRISPR activation. And one thing to know about pharmaceuticals for transgender people is that we don't actually have any pharmaceuticals that are specifically designed for us. All of the pharmaceuticals that we take for hormone replacement therapy is basically things designed for other people. And so this was something that I was imagining might be useful for space travel, yes, but could also potentially be useful for people here on Earth. And that's sort of a key thing for a lot of my work. Now, this is a project that I also started in 2020, and so COVID got in the way, and so we weren't really able to do much of the actual scientific research on this other than basically bench or desk research. And so if any of you work at a biochemical or biotechnology company and want to help out with this project, I'm very interested. I'm all ears. So what we did instead was look at some of the enabling technologies that might help us in this research. And one of the things that you would need to do the research for this project would be the production of what's called a clinostat. And a clinostat is basically a device that rotates and simulates microgravity. And so these devices, when made commercially, are often many, many thousands of euros. And I'm an artist, so I don't necessarily have access to that kind of capital, but nor do a lot of other types of biohackers who I work with. And so what we did is we basically reverse engineered some existing designs, and were able to reduce the cost of this to around 500 euros or so in parts and labor. And basically, something that's very important for me as well is that everything is open sourced. And so as you see here, you see this thing rotating, and you'll see a little pink blob in the middle of it that is basically showing that it simulates microgravity. I've also been developing, as a result of that project, different sorts of speculative ideas about growing my hormones on the outside of my own body through this device that I call saccular fount. And a huge part of this also was doing different types of photo performances, as we call them, that play around with the representations of astronauts and outer space, and also representations of the trans body, and especially the trans female body, which is often highly sexualized in our culture. And so I wanted to play around with that and sort of push this imagery away from those types of representations and basically directly confront the gaze of the viewer. So these projects were really sort of focused on trying to transform my body, but over the past year, I've begun to work with another organism here a little bit. And this is an organism that's called lichen. And I was told earlier, and I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation, it's lavar in Swedish. And basically, lichen is a symbiosis of algae and fungi. And basically, these two organisms live together, and in this wonderful symbiosis, basically the algae produce energy for the fungi, and the fungi provides protection. And so these are some images from a recent research trip that I did to Iceland, exploring the lichen there. Now, why would I be interested in this organism if I'm talking about space? Well, it turns out that lichen are an extremely resilient organism. So this is an image from some research that the European Space Agency did where they sent lichen up to the International Space Station. And they put lichen on the outside of the space station for a year and a half. So it was exposed to the ravages of space, hot and cold, vacuum, radiation, et cetera, et cetera. They brought lichen back a year and a half later, and 75% of the cells were still viable. They were still able to live. So lichen basically can exist within the ravages of space. They can live for many hundreds of years, sometimes even thousands of years here on Earth. They grow on trees, they grow on metal, they grow on rocks, and so forth. And so I've been working recently with students at a school in the Netherlands in a program called Ecology Futures, and working with them to study the lichen within sort of an art science context. And I should note that all of the students in my class are women or non-binary. And so this project has led me to begin thinking about sort of the latest aspect of my work, which is a project that I'm currently working on in residence at Art Hub in Copenhagen. And it's called Amateur Lithopanspermia. And this is the last thing that I'm going to end with, and I'm going to explain the title here. So panspermia is the idea that life did not actually originate on Earth, but originated elsewhere in the universe. And basically, rocks from whatever that planet was were ejected into space and traveled around for many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years, and then landed here on Earth, and perhaps started life here. So lichen, being this resilient organism, perhaps are a key organism that might be involved in panspermia. And so this is a project that's in the early stages of development, where I'm basically doing a speculative imagining of sending lichen back out into space, and potentially seeing where it might land, perhaps on Mars, perhaps on some other planet in the solar system, perhaps somewhere even much further away. And so I'm looking at different types of meteorites that I could potentially grow the lichen on to send them out into space, including a fragment of a meteorite that fell in my home state of Iowa back in the 19th century. And then I'm imagining trying to send them to space using what's called solar sails. And solar sails are basically a form of space propulsion that doesn't require any chemical rockets at all. It basically is pushed by the light of the sun. And so basically these sails end up being quite large in order to capture all of that pressure of the sun. And so this is an early rendering of the project where I'm imagining this spacecraft and the sails of it being shaped like butterfly wings as a way of also thinking about metaphors of transformation and metamorphosis. So with that, I will finish up. Thank you.